The Persian Gulf had never felt so electric. The night of March 8th bled in the early hours of 2026, with a tension so thick it could be cut with the blade of a fighter jet screaming at Mach 2. For weeks, the world had been watching, holding its collective breath, as the United States, Iran, and Israel danced on the razor's edge of a confrontation that military analysts had been warning about the autumn of 2025. Diplomatic cables went unanswered, back-channel communications went cold, and then, at precisely 347 hours Greenwich Mean Time, the unthinkable happened. Iran launched what it called Operation Epic Fury, a massive, coordinated aerial assault targeting the USS Gerald R. Ford, the most advanced nuclear-powered aircraft carrier on the face of the Earth, operating in international waters in the northern stretch of the Arabian Sea. To understand how the world arrived at this moment, one of the most dangerous flashpoints in modern military history, you have to go back to the slow-burning crisis that had been escalating with terrifying velocity since the fall of 2025. The assassination of a senior Iranian Revolutionary Corps commander in a precision Israeli airstrike outside Damascus shattered whatever remained of the fragile, informal understanding between Tehran and Jerusalem. Iran's supreme leader had vowed in nationally televised remarks that the blood spilled would be answered, not in days, not in weeks, but at a time and place of Iran's choosing. Those words, broadcast across the Islamic Republic and rebroadcast by every major international news network, were not rhetoric, they were a promise, and the world was about to learn that Iran intended to keep it. By November 2025, the United States had moved 2 carrier strike groups into the region, the USS Gerald R. Ford and the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, in one of the most significant shows of naval force the Pentagon had authorized in over 2 decades, flanked by guided missile destroyers, cruisers, submarines running silent and deep, and a constellation of support vessels. The American naval presence sent an unambiguous message to Tehran. The United States was watching, the United States was ready, and the United States would not flinch. But Iran was not flinching either. Behind closed doors in Tehran, inside the hardened command bunkers of the IRGC Aerospace Force, commanders were finalizing a plan that they believed could shatter American naval supremacy in the region and send a message to the entire world, a message written not in ink but in fire. The geopolitical pressure reached a boiling point in late February 26, when Israeli airstrikes targeting what Jerusalem described as Iranian nuclear weapons development facilities struck 3 sites simultaneously, one near Isfahan, one in the mountainous terrain near Fordo, and a third in a classified location that Iranian state media refused to confirm or deny existed. The strikes were surgical, devastating, and politically catastrophic for Tehran. Iranian state television broadcast images of smoldering wreckage, alongside declarations that the Islamic Republic had suffered an act of war. Within 48 hours, emergency sessions of the UN Security Council collapsed in acrimony as the United States vetoed a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire, and Russia and China demanded what they called accountability for Zionist aggression. The diplomatic architecture of restraint crumbled entirely, and in the Persian Gulf, the crews aboard American warships began sleeping in combat readiness, knowing that the storm was coming. Operation Epic Fury was Iran's answer, and it was, by any military standard, an audacious, almost inconceivable gamble. What Iranian commanders had assembled was not a token strike, not a symbolic gesture designed to save face while avoiding escalation. This was a full-spectrum offensive aerial operation involving the IRGC's most capable assets that Iran had spent years secretly upgrading, training with, and preparing for exactly this kind of confrontation. 14 Sukhoi Su-35 fighter jets, acquired through a controversial defense agreement with Russia finalized in 2024, formed the spearhead of the attack. Alongside them flew 8 F-14 Tomcats, the legendary American-built interceptors originally delivered to the Imperial Iranian Air Force under the Shah and now thoroughly modernized by Iranian engineers with domestically developed avionics, radar systems, and weapons packages. This was not the Iran of 1988, caught with aging equipment and a decimated military. This was a nation that 30 years rebuilding its air force in the shadows, and tonight it was bringing every ounce of that rebuilt power to bear. The attack package also included a swarm of 62 Shahed-class combat drones, expected version of the same unmanned vehicles that had already proven their battlefield lethality in conflicts across the Middle East and Eastern Europe. But these were not the simple, single-engine drones of earlier years. These were Shahed 238 variants, jet-propelled, radar-evading, carrying significantly enhanced warheads, and equipped with Iranian-developed guidance systems hardened against electronic jamming. Alongside the drone swarm, the IRGC had programmed salvos of F-35C and Zulfiqar ballistic missiles to arrive simultaneously with a time-on-target coordination strategy designed to overwhelm American defensive systems by flooding every sensor, every engagement envelope at precisely the same moment. moment. It was an attack designed by commanders who had studied American naval doctrine exhaustively and believed they had found the seam, the brief, chaotic window in which sheer volume would defeat the most sophisticated air defense system ever deployed at sea. They were wrong, and the manner in which they were wrong would rewrite the global understanding of American military dominance for a generation. The first indication that something was happening came from the USS Gerald R. Ford itself, but from an E-2D Advanced Hawkeye airborne warning aircraft that had been orbiting at altitude approximately 250 nautical miles, one of 3 such aircraft that the carrier's air wing kept continuously aloft during heightened alert conditions. The Hawkeye's powerful AN/8x9 radar, one of the most capable airborne surveillance systems ever produced, began painting a picture that the crew initially found difficult to process. The contacts were not appearing from one direction or one altitude band. They were coming from multiple vectors simultaneously. Aircraft from Iranian airfields to the north, drones appearing low on the horizon from the west, and the first thermal blooms of ballistic missile launch flaring into existence on the infrared sensors of a pair of orbiting reconnaissance satellites whose data was being fed in real time to the strike group's combat information centers. The tactical picture that assembled itself on screens across the carrier strike group in those first 6 minutes was unlike anything American naval officers had confronted outside of a wargame simulation. Rear Admiral James Hawk Holloway, commander of Carrier Strike Group 12, had been in the flag bridge, having never truly gone to sleep that night. When the general quarters alarm began its relentless clanging through the steel corridors of the Gerald R. Ford at 03:53 hours, he was already pulling on his headset, already absorbing the cascade of data being routed to his command screens. In a career spanning 31 years and 3 combat deployments, Holloway had trained for this moment thousands of times. He had run the simulations. He had written papers on multi-axis carrier defense. He had argued in Pentagon briefing rooms that the carrier strike group remained the dominant platform in any conceivable theater of war. Now, at this precise moment, with 60-odd drones, 22 fighter aircraft, and an unknown number of ballistic missiles inbound, Admiral Holloway was about to prove his own thesis, or be proven catastrophically wrong. The carrier's Cooperative Engagement Capability network, a system that links every ship, aircraft, and weapon in the strike group into a single, seamlessly integrated defensive organism, lit up with controlled fury of a machine that had been built for exactly this purpose. The 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, a close-in carrier defense, the USS Laboon and the USS Bainbridge, began cycling their SPY-6ER systems to track mode, assigning fire control solutions to incoming threats at a rate of calculation that no human brain could match. The guided missile cruiser USS Leyte Gulf, positioned to provide extended-range defense, began spinning up its Mark 41-1 vertical launch system cells, preparing to put SM-3 Block IIAs into the air against the ballistic missiles that were now confirmed inbound. The math of American naval defense was remorseless. The Gerald R. Ford strike group carried, between its escort vessels, more than 400 surface-to-air missiles of varying types, with overlapping engagement envelopes that created a layered defensive wall no attacking force had ever successfully penetrated. At 0401 hours, the first SM-3 Block IIA interceptor left Leyte Gulf's vertical launch system in a white fire that was visible from the carrier nearly 40 miles away. 12 seconds later, a second interceptor, then a third. High above the Arabian Sea, in the cold, thin air of the upper atmosphere, the SM-3s climbed toward their targets with a velocity that beggared comprehension. Kinetic kill vehicles traveling at over 9,600 miles per hour, guided by a fire control solution updated hundreds of times per second. The fated 330 ballistic missiles never had a chance. The first intercept at 04404 hours, a brilliant, visible on thermal imaging satellite feeds that American intelligence agencies were monitoring in real time from facilities in Virginia and Colorado. 3 more intercepts followed in the next 90 seconds. The ballistic missile threat, the component of Operation Epic Fury that Iranian planners had believed would the decisive blow, was extinguished with a clinical efficiency that bordered on the mundane. But the drones were a different problem. 62 Shahed 238s, flying low, flying fast, their jet engines screaming across the wave tops, were designed to defeat exactly the kind of high-altitude intercept systems that had just demolished the ballistic missiles. They came in at altitudes of between 50 and 300 feet above the sea surface, using the radar horizon to mask their approach, trusting their numbers to overwhelm defensive fire systems that could only engage a finite number of targets simultaneously. It was a reasonable theory. It was not a sufficient theory. The Phalanx close-in weapon systems aboard the Gerald R. Ford and her escorts, radar-guided 20mm Gatling guns that fired at a rate of 4,500 rounds per minute, began engaging the drones as they crossed inside 20 nautical miles. The sound, described by sailors aboard the lagoon as an industrial grinding thunder, was continuous and overwhelming. The deck-mounted SeaRAM systems, firing rolling airframe missiles, added another layer of intercepts, and the F-18 Super Hornets that had been launched and were orbiting in combat air patrol positions since its midnight engaged the outer edge of a drone swarm with AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles, picking off targets at ranges exceeding 20 miles before the drones ever reached the inner defensive ring. Of the 62 drones launched by the IRGC, 58 were destroyed at various layers of the defensive envelope. 3 were defeated by the USS Gerald R. Ford's own shipboard systems as they crossed inside 10 nautical miles. Just one, reached close enough to discharge its warhead before being vaporized by a Phalanx burst at a range of less than 400 meters. The resulting explosion was significant. The resulting damage to the carrier was not. A small fire broke out in a secondary equipment space on the starboard side. It was extinguished in 11 minutes. The Gerald R. Ford, displacing 100,000 tons of nuclear-powered steel and representing the most capable warship ever constructed in human history, did not change course. It did not reduce speed. Its flight deck continued operations. The fighter jets were the most dramatic confrontation of all. The 14 Su-35s and 8 F-14s, flying in carefully rehearsed strike packages, had been assigned to penetrate the carrier's combat air patrol and deliver their air-to-surface missile payloads against the Ford at medium range. What they encountered instead was a wall of American air power that no amount of planning had adequately prepared them for. 2 squadrons of F-18F Super Hornets, 24 aircraft in total, had airborne for exactly this engagement, but the decisive element was something the Iranians had not fully accounted for. F-35C Lightning aircraft operating in a low observable mode, data linked to everything in the strike group but invisible to Iranian radar, had been providing target cueing and electronic warfare support since the attack began. The F-35s saw everything the Iranians were doing before the Iranians saw anything at all. They assigned targeting solutions to the Super Hornets' painted threat envelopes and fed the tactical picture into the integrated fire control network with a precision that rendered the entire Iranian strike package, for all its firepower, essentially blind. The aerial engagement lasted 19 minutes. 11 Iranian Su-35s were destroyed. 3 turned back and fled toward the Iranian coast, pursued for a time by Super Hornets, who were eventually recalled to maintain the defensive posture rather than penetrate Iranian airspace and risk a further escalation. Of the 8 F-14s, 5 were shot down in the first 12 minutes. 2 escaped. 1, struck by an IM-9X Sidewinder that failed to achieve a clean kill, managed to limp back toward the Iranian coast with its crew, a fact that American forces were already tracking via signals intelligence and which would later become a significant element of the diplomatic communications that followed. Not a single American aircraft was lost. Not one American pilot was killed. The USS Gerald R. Ford sustained no material damage to any combat essential system. The most powerful carrier strike group on the planet had just absorbed the most Iranian aerial attack in history and emerged intact, operational, and ready to conduct further missions before the sun rose over the Arabian Sea. The aftermath of Operation Epic Fury began unfolding with the same intensity as the battle itself. In Washington, President Sarah Mitchell, already in the White House Situation Room where she had been monitoring the engagement in real time, the first E-2D Kant report at 3:55 hours local time, authorized a carefully calibrated response. The United States was not going to allow an attack of this magnitude on its forces to go unanswered, but neither was Washington going to allow a single engagement, however dramatic, to spiral into a regional war that consumed the entire Middle East and drag in Russia and other powers with their own agendas and interests. The response would be precise, it would be proportionate, and it would demonstrate with absolute finality what the United States military was capable of when it chose to apply force. At 0662 hours, as dawn was breaking over the Arabian Sea and the crew of the Gerald R. Ford was still clearing debris from the starboard equipment fire, 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles were launched from the USS Lake Gulf and 2 submerged fast-attack submarines operating in the northern Arabian Sea. Their targets, identified through a combination of satellite imagery, signals intelligence, and human intelligence sources that had been refined over years of persistent surveillance, were the IRGC Aerospace Force command and control nodes that had coordinated Operation Epic Fury, 3 forward operating bases, 2 radar and communication facilities, 1 hardened command bunker whose location had been known to American intelligence for over a year and which had been held in reserve for exactly this contingency. The Tomahawks, flying their terrain following low-altitude flight files, arrived at their targets in a coordinated time-on-target strike at 0741 hours. The battle damage assessment, compiled compiled from returning imagery within 4 hours, was definitive. Every target was destroyed or rendered non-operational. Iranian state media, which had spent the previous 90 minutes broadcasting triumphant accounts of the alleged destruction of an American carrier, went suddenly conspicuously quiet. In Tehran, the Supreme Leader convened an emergency session of the Supreme National Security Council. The generals who had briefed him on the brilliant certainty of Operation Epic Fury's success, who had assured him that American defenses would be overwhelmed, that the carrier would be struck with crippling force, that the Islamic Republic would emerge from this engagement with its prestige and power enormously enhanced, now silence, absorbing a reality that their own intelligence apparatus had catastrophically failed to anticipate. The losses were staggering: 16 of 22 fighter aircraft gone, most of the drone swarm obliterated, the ballistic missiles intercepted without a single successful hit, and now, in retaliation, 6 critical IREC military installations reduced to smoking rubble in the space of a single hour. The operation that was supposed to be a demonstration of Iranian power had become, with devastating swiftness, a demonstration of exactly the opposite. The international reaction was immediate and complex. Israel's prime minister, speaking at an emergency cabinet session in Jerusalem, praised what he called the unbreakable strength of the American defense architecture and reiterated his country's commitment to its alliance with Washington. The European Union issued a statement condemning Iran's attack as a flagrant violation of international law and calling for an immediate cessation of hostilities. Russia, which had sold the Su-35s now scattered in flaming wreckage across the Arabian Sea, issued a carefully worded statement calling for restraint by all parties and notably declined to condemn the American retaliatory strikes. Diplomatic calculation that spoke volumes about Moscow's private assessment of the engagement's outcome. China called for an emergency Security Council session while simultaneously moving to protect its own commercial shipping interests in the region. The Arab states of the Gulf, whose own security arrangements depended in no small measure on the credibility of American military power, watched the events of March 9, 26, with a mixture of relief and renewed conviction that the United States remained the only military force in the world capable of projecting this kind of decisive, dominant power. For the men and women aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford, the dawn of March 9, 2026, carried a weight that no training evolution and no simulation had ever quite replicated. They had been attacked. Their ship had been struck, however glancingly. Their friends and shipmates in every compartment had spent the most terrifying hours of their lives strapped into battle stations, listening to the sounds of the world's most defensive systems, fighting off an attack that was, by any historical measure, significant. Petty Officer First Class Daniela Rivera, a fire control technician from San Antonio, later told a reporter that the moment she realized was not going to sink, the moment the last threat symbol faded from her tactical display, was the most profound experience of her life. "We trained for that," she said. "We trained every single day for that, and when it came, we were ready. Every single one of us was ready." The long-term strategic implications of Operation Epic Fury's catastrophic failure were already being analyzed by defense ministries and intelligence agencies in every capital on Earth before the sun fully cleared the horizon over the Arabian Sea. The engagement had proven, with a clarity that no amount of academic analysis could replicate, that the United States Carrier Strike Group remained the preeminent instrument of military power in the contemporary world, not because it was immune to attack, but because it had engineered, trained, and continuously improved defeat exactly the kind of sophisticated, multi-vector assault that Iran had thrown at it. The Cooperative Engagement Capability, the layered missile defense architecture, the fifth-generation stealth aircraft providing invisible overwatch, the integration of space-based sensors with shipboard fire control systems, the relentless, grinding competence of American sailors who had practiced these exact scenarios until the responses were as automatic as breathing. All of it had functioned exactly as designed, and in doing so, it had delivered a message to every state actor that harbored ambitions of challenging American naval dominance. A message that was, at its core, very simple. This is what American military power looks like when it is fully committed. But the story of March 9, 2026, was not only a story about weapons systems and tactical outcomes. It was a story about decisions, the decisions made in the months and years before this night that positioned American forces to respond as they did. The decision to invest in the SM-3 Block IIA interceptor, the decision to accelerate F-35C carrier integration, the decision to prioritize networked cooperative defense over any single platform or system, the decision to maintain carrier strike group readiness at a level that allowed a crew to transition from routine operations to maximum combat effectiveness in a matter of minutes. These were not decisions made in the heat of the moment. They were decisions made in budget meetings, in acquisition hearings, in technical development programs, in training commands that pushed crews cruise to their limits year after year after year. The victory of the Gerald R. Ford on the morning of March 9, 2026, was decades in the making. As this broadcast goes to air, the diplomatic situation remains extraordinarily fluid. Back-channel communications between Washington and Tehran, facilitated, according to sources familiar with the process, through Omani intermediaries, have reportedly been active since mid-morning on March 9. American officials have made clear that the United States has no desire for a wider war, will respond to any further attacks with force proportionate to the threat. Iranian officials, through state media, have been conspicuously restrained in their public messaging since the early morning propaganda claims were quietly scrubbed from government broadcast schedules. The IRGC has not issued a statement. The Supreme Leader has not appeared in public. And in the northern Arabian Sea, the USS Gerald R. Ford continues to operate, its nuclear reactors turning, its catapults launching and recovering aircraft on routine patrol schedules, its carrying out their duties with the quiet, professional focus that characterizes America's career naval officers, as if consequential aerial engagement in a generation had been nothing more than another entry in the ship's log. The carrier steams on, and the message it sends, simply by steaming on, is the most powerful statement that any military force in the world can make. We were attacked, we endured, and we are still here. That statement, written not in words but in the continued operation of 100,000 tons of American naval power, reverberates across every military headquarters, every foreign ministry, and every intelligence service on Earth today. Iran launched its most ambitious military operation in decades. It committed its finest aircraft, its most advanced drones, its most capable missiles. It attacked the symbol of American military power in the most direct way it could conceive, and the United States of America absorbed that blow, struck back with precision and lethality, and never broke stride. This is Operation Epic Fury. This is what it means to challenge American dominance. And this is what happens next, not with triumphant declarations or chest-beating rhetoric, but with the steady, relentless, professionally competent application of the most powerful military force the world has ever produced, operating exactly as designed, in exactly the conditions it was built for, with exactly the results its creators intended. The USS Gerald R. Ford is still at sea, its crew is still on watch, and the stars and stripes, flying from its mast in the early morning wind over the Arabian Sea, represent something that no missile, no drone, and no fighter jet, however fast or however many, has yet managed to tear down. Tonight, they tried again. Tonight, they failed again. And as the sun sets over the Persian Gulf on this extraordinary day, March 2026, the world has been reminded, with a force that will not soon be forgotten, of exactly what America is capable of when the moment demands it.